The Jewish people had no country of their own. Their homeland was destroyed by the Romans, their capital was burned to the ground, and they were scattered across the world. That should have been the end of the story, but somehow, after nearly 2,000 years, they came back. The story of how they did it is one of the most unbelievable stories in history. Today, Israel sits at the center of the most important conflicts on Earth. And how did they go from having no country at all to becoming one of the most influential nations in the world? Let's go back to where the story began. 2,000 years ago, this land was called Judea, and it had a big problem. It sat right in the middle of the Roman Empire, the biggest, scariest superpower the world had ever seen. Here it is. That's where the whole story begins. And the Jewish people living there really did not want to be bossed around by Rome. For a while, Rome played it smart. They let a local king named Herod run the place for them. Now, Herod was a bit of a madman. He was so terrified of losing his throne that he had members of his own family killed. But one thing is for sure, he could build. He doubled the size of the Temple Mount, the holiest spot in Jerusalem. Out in the desert, he put up fortresses on the mountaintops. And on a stretch of coast with no natural harbor at all, he built a whole city, called Caesarea, with a port he made by pouring concrete into the open sea that somehow hardened underwater. Engineers still aren't totally sure how he pulled that off 2,000 years ago. But after Herod died, the Romans got greedy. Their leaders squeezed the Jews harder and harder. They taxed them so hard it hurt, and even stole the sacred treasure inside the temple. And in the year 66, the Jews finally snapped. They grabbed whatever weapons they could find and threw the Romans out. And what's crazy is it worked. Well, for a bit. For 4 whole years, the Jews ran their own land again. They even wiped out a whole Roman army sent to crush them. But you do not embarrass Rome and just walk away. So, Rome sent a giant army to take Jerusalem back brick by brick if they had to. Almost everything we know about this war comes from one single guy, a Jewish general who got captured, switched sides, and then wrote the whole story of the war from inside the Roman camp. His name was Josephus. So, I've decided to write the complete history of this war. You were leading the rebels against us an hour ago. And now, I'm the official storyteller. Funny how fast things change. Sir, can he do that? Apparently, he's already on chapter 3. Chapter 4? You come out of it very well, by the way. Go on. Brave, brilliant, surprisingly tall. Oh, he's good, sir. Get this man a desk. By now, life inside the sealed-off city had become a nightmare. The food was gone, the people fought in the streets over scraps. Josephus even claims one starving mother, driven mad by hunger, cooked and ate her own child. Historians argue about the details, but the big picture is clear. Jerusalem was starving to death. In the year 70, the Romans broke through the walls of Jerusalem and burned the great temple to the ground. Josephus claimed over 1 million people died. Modern historians think it was closer to 500,000. Either way, the result was the same. The most important place in the whole Jewish world was gone, and losing it hurt far more than losing a building. The temple was the single holiest place on earth for the Jewish people, the one spot where they believed they could stand closest to God. Now, it was a pile of ash. But a few hundred rebels refused to give up. They slipped out into the desert and locked themselves inside a fortress on top of a giant cliff, and what happened up on that rock became one of the most argued about stories in all of history. The fortress was called Masada. It sits on top of a huge rock in the middle of the desert with steep cliffs on every side. Around 960 Jewish rebels were hiding at the top, and down at the bottom, about 15,000 Roman soldiers showed up to drag them out. There was just one problem. You can't exactly charge up a cliff. So the Romans did something completely insane. They decided to build a ramp. A great big giant ramp made of dirt and stone, sloping all the way up the side of the mountain. I'm not joking. They literally hauled about 500,000 tons of dirt by hand until a brand new hill stood in the desert. they literally changed the shape of the landscape because less than 1,000 people were annoying them. And get this, you can still see that ramp today, sitting right where they left it 2,000 years ago. Just take Highway 3199 in Israel's Judean desert. When it was finally built, the Romans smashed through the walls, expecting one last bloody fight. Instead, they found almost total silence. Almost everyone inside was already dead. According to Josephus, the rebels had made a choice. Instead of being captured and sold as slaves, they chose to die free. He says he got the whole story from 2 women and 5 children who survived by hiding in a water tank. Now, modern archaeologists actually argue about whether it really happened exactly like that, but true or not, the legend of Masada stuck around for 2,000 years. The Jews weren't quite finished though. About 60 years later, they rose up one more time, led by a rebel named Bar Kokhba. For a couple of years, he actually ran a free Jewish state again. And then Rome crushed it even harder than before. The cost was massive. Ancient Roman writers claimed more than 500,000 Jews were killed and hundreds of towns were destroyed. Whatever the real number, it was a catastrophe. This time, the Roman emperor was done playing nice. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to erase Judea from history for good. So he started with the name. He grabbed the name of the Jews' oldest enemies, a long-gone people called the Philistines, and slapped it onto the whole region. He called it Palestine. It was an insult on purpose, a way to wipe the word Judea right off the map. Then he banned Jews from even setting foot in Jerusalem. And it kinda worked. With their temple gone and their capital off limits, the Jewish people scattered out across the whole planet, to Europe, to North Africa, all over the Middle East. For the next 1,900 years, they would not have a country of their own. Now, hold on to that fact, because everything else in this video, every war and every comeback in it, is really about those scattered people trying to find a way back home. But with the Jews pushed out, one giant question hung over the land. Whose was it now? And the very empire that had just crushed them was about to answer it in the strangest way you can imagine. By completely switching gods. Oh, and one more thing about those rebels before we move on. During all of that chaos, somebody hid hundreds of scrolls inside clay jars and stashed them in desert caves near the Dead Sea. Then they vanished from history. Nobody even knew the scrolls existed. All the way until 1947, when a little shepherd boy chasing a runaway goat tossed a rock into a cave and heard pottery shatter. Inside were some of the oldest copies of the Bible ever found, sitting there untouched since Roman times. Wild, right? One lost goat and history got rewritten. So anyway, about 200 years later, the Roman Empire did a complete 180. The same empire that had burned the temple slowly became Christian. And just like that, this dusty little place became the most valuable land on earth, because this was where Jesus had lived and died. Everyone wanted a piece of it. The first to really go looking was the emperor's own mother, a woman named Helena. As an old lady, she sailed all the way across the empire to track down the actual places from the Bible. She walked up to one hill in Jerusalem and made up her mind.
This is the spot. Jesus was buried right here. Start digging.
With respect, how could you possibly know that?
I am the emperor's mother. Build a church on it. Ma'am, so far we found a hill. Yeah, it's mostly hill down here. Keep digging.
Perhaps we could consult the local records first.
I consulted my feelings. They were very clear. And if we don't find anything, then you dug the wrong hole. Dig another one.
Fetch more shovels.
And they did. Her son built a huge church right on top of that hill, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's still standing today, almost 1,700 years later. And Helena didn't stop at that hill. She went home claiming she had dug up the actual wooden cross Jesus was killed on. For the next 1,000 years, tiny splinters of that true cross would be treated as the most precious object in all of Christianity. Over the next 300 years, the whole land filled up with churches, monks, and pilgrims, religious travelers who came from far away just to walk where Jesus had walked. Jerusalem became a proudly Christian city, and the Jews, well, they were mostly locked out, watching from a distance as someone else settled into their old home. Then, in the year 614, everything flipped again. A Persian army came charging in from the east and captured Jerusalem. They burned churches and even carried that holy cross all the way back to Persia as a prize. And what's really wild is that Jewish fighters joined the Persians, hoping this was finally their shot to win their holy city back. And for a brief moment, it looked like they just might. But alas, it didn't last. A Christian emperor marched east, beat the Persians, and brought the Holy Cross back to Jerusalem as a huge victory. The Jewish dream of going home died almost as fast as it had appeared. But step back and look at the big picture. You've now got one tiny piece of land that is deeply holy to two giant religions at the same time. The Jews, who had been there first, and the Christians who ran the place now, both completely certain it belonged to them and only them. That alone is a recipe for endless fighting. But it was about to get so much more complicated. Because far to the south, out of the deserts of Arabia, a brand new religion was exploding outward at a speed nobody could believe. And it was heading straight for Jerusalem. That new religion was Islam. Within just a few years of the Prophet Muhammad's death, Muslim armies had burst out of Arabia and grabbed a huge amount of land in every direction. In barely 100 years, Islam would stretch all the way from Spain in the west to the edge of India in the east. Almost nothing in history had ever spread that fast. And in the year 637, those armies arrived at the walls of Jerusalem. But there was no bloodbath this time. The city simply gave up, and the Muslim leader, a caliph named Umar, offered the Christians and Jews a deal. Keep your religion, keep your churches, just pay tax, and we'll leave you in peace. Then something remarkable happened. The city's Christian leader, trying to be welcoming, invited Umar to come pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest church in the world. And Umar said no.
Please, you are welcome to pray here, in our most sacred church. If I pray here, my people will turn into a mosque the moment I leave. I won't be the reason you lose it.
You would really turn down the holiest church in the world?
I'm turning it down because it's the holiest church in the world. Sir, where will you pray instead? Outside. The courtyard looks fine.
The courtyard? It's full of pigeons.
Then the pigeons will witness something important.
The bishop looks confused, sir.
He'll understand in a few hundred years.
So he prayed just outside instead, on purpose, to protect a church that wasn't even part of his own religion. A conqueror politely turning down the holiest spot in the city. But the Muslims had their own deep tie to Jerusalem. They believed the Prophet Muhammad had risen up to heaven from one specific rock in the city. And it was the holiest rock imaginable. The very same rock the Jewish temple had once stood on, centuries before. So they built something stunning right on top of it. A shining golden dome, finished in the year 691, called the Dome of the Rock. It's the oldest great Islamic building still standing anywhere on the planet, and it carries some of the oldest writing about Islam found anywhere in the world. You can still see it glowing over Jerusalem today. And just like that, sharing it became impossible. One single rock was now holy to Jews, to Christians, and to Muslims, all at the very same time. Three of the biggest religions on earth, all pointing at the exact same spot and saying, "That one is ours." Whoever held that rock could say they held the very center of the world. There was never going to be a peaceful way to share it. For over 400 years, the Muslims ran Jerusalem fairly quietly, and the three faiths mostly lived side by side. But that calm was about to be broken, because thousands of miles away in Europe, a guy in purple robes was about to stand up and give one single speech. A speech that would send a wave of armored knights marching straight at the city. In the year 1059, the most powerful religious leader in Europe, the Pope, stood up and made a massive demand. The holy city of Jerusalem was in Muslim hands, and he wanted Christians to take it back. Anyone who joined, he promised, would have all their sins wiped clean. The response was huge. Tens of thousands of European knights, poor farmers, and adventurers stitched crosses onto their clothes and set off on a brutal march halfway across the world. We call them the Crusaders. The journey took years, and thousands died of hunger and sickness before they ever even saw the city. But in 1099, the survivors finally reached the walls of Jerusalem, and they smashed their way in. If you're enjoying this video, subscribe. That's probably the easiest decision anyone's made in this video. What happened next was a bloodbath. The Crusaders tore through the streets and killed Muslims and Jews by the thousands. These were men who had marched across the world in the name of God, and they left the holy city soaked in blood. Then they set up their own Christian kingdom and made themselves at home. They held Jerusalem for 88 years. But out in the surrounding lands, one brilliant leader was slowly pulling all the scattered Muslim lands together into a single army. His name was Saladin. In 1187, Saladin crushed the main Crusader army in one giant battle, then marched on Jerusalem and took it back. And here's the twist nobody sees coming. He didn't kill them all. Remember the bloodbath when the Crusaders first took the city? Saladin did the exact opposite. He let the Christians pay a small fee and simply walk out alive. The man Europe had called a savage turned out to be far kinder than the holy warriors had ever been. Europe completely lost its mind, so it sent its biggest celebrity to win the city back. King Richard the Lionheart of England, one of the most famous warriors alive. Richard and Saladin spent years fighting up and down the coast, but the strangest thing happened between them. They started to respect each other. When Richard came down with a bad fever, Saladin, his sworn enemy, sent him fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to help him cool down and recover. But then, once old Richard was better, they went right back to trying to kill each other. Hey-ho. In the end, Richard won battle after battle, but he could never quite take Jerusalem itself. He got close enough to see its walls in the distance, but then turned around and sailed home empty-handed. The Crusaders had hit their high point, and now they were slowly fading away. But the next people to rule this land wouldn't get there by beating the Crusaders. They'd get there by stopping the single most terrifying army the world has ever seen. And they'd stop them right here in northern Israel. In the 1200s, a new kind of nightmare was spreading across the world. The Mongols. Galloping out of Central Asia, they rolled over everyone in their path, from China all the way to the edge of Europe. They had flattened entire cities, sometimes killing every single person inside. Whole kingdoms gave up the moment they heard the Mongols were even coming. Nobody, anywhere, had found a way to stop them. And now, they were riding straight for the Holy Land. The army that finally stood in their way was one of the strangest in history, the Mamluks. They were a kingdom based in Egypt that was, no joke, run by former slaves. As boys, they had been bought, trained into the very best soldiers, and then they had grabbed power and started running the whole country themselves. In the year 1260, the two sides slammed together in a valley in northern Israel, and the Mamluks beat the unstoppable Mongols by stealing the Mongols' own favorite move. They pretended to run away, the Mongols came charging after them, thinking they'd already won, and rode straight into a hidden trap. It was one of the only times in the entire century that Mongols were truly beaten. The Mamluks ran the region for a couple hundred years after that. Then, in 1517, a new superpower swallowed up the whole area, the Ottoman Empire, ruled by the Turks. Their greatest sultan, which is kind of a king, Suleiman the Magnificent, decided to rebuild the great stone walls around Jerusalem's old city. Those exact walls are still standing today. But there's a dark little legend attached to those walls. The story goes that Suleiman's builders made one terrible mistake. They accidentally left an important holy site sitting just outside the walls.
The walls are magnificent. There's just one small problem.
Oh?
You left the holy tomb on the wrong side of them.
That does sound like a problem.
It is. For you.
In our defense, sire, the walls themselves are flawless.
They are. Strong, tall, beautiful. I genuinely love them.
So, we're forgiven?
Guards!
I told you we should have walked the route twice.
2 old graves near the Jaffa Gate are still said to belong to those poor builders. And then, for almost 400 years, the whole land simply went quiet. Under the Ottomans, it became a sleepy, dusty, half-empty corner of a giant empire that pretty much everyone forgot about. Jerusalem, the city that kings and armies had died for over and over, shrank into a small, poor, forgotten town. By the 1800s, the whole area held only a few 100,000 people. The grand holy city at the center of 3 world religions had become a dusty little place of crumbling stone. It really looked like the story was over, like this land would just sleep forever. But far away, in the crowded cities of Europe, the very Jewish people the Romans had kicked out more than 1,000 years before were about to come up with one bold idea. An idea that would wake this sleepy land right back up. Like I said earlier, for almost 1,800 years, the Jewish people had lived scattered all over the world, spread across Europe, the Middle East, and Northern Africa. Always a small group among everyone else, and far too often hated and attacked. They had no country of their own, nowhere that was truly theirs and truly safe. By the late 1800s, things were getting worse. In Russia especially, Jews were being killed in violent mob attacks called pogroms, where whole neighborhoods would be raided and burned while the police just looked the other way. Something had to give. Then a journalist named Theodor Herzl had a crazy idea. What if the Jews stopped waiting and hoping and simply built their own country? A real homeland where they could finally be safe. In 1896, he wrote a short book laying out the whole plan, and it sparked a movement called Zionism, the push to create a Jewish state. What's wild is that homeland was almost somewhere else entirely. Herzl seriously looked at building it in Argentina. The British government even offered up a chunk of East Africa, in modern-day Kenya. For a brief moment, the Jewish state might not have been in the Middle East at all. But in the end, the deep connection to one piece of land won out. The Old Land, the one the Romans had driven them out of almost 2,000 years before. Okay, I just want to pause on that for a second, because it's genuinely hard to wrap your head around. Think about everything that has happened since the Romans burned that temple. The Roman Empire itself rose, ruled the world, and crumbled into dust. Whole civilizations appeared and vanished. Languages have died, empires have come and gone like seasons, and through all of it, scattered across the entire planet, Jewish families kept ending their Passover meal with the same 4 words: next year in Jerusalem. For nearly 2,000 years, grandparent to child, in Poland, in Morocco, in Iraq, in Spain, a promise passed down for almost 100 generations. And now, finally, people were actually getting on boats to keep it. So, Jews began moving back, in wave after wave. They bought up land, drained mosquito-filled swamps, and started farming ground that had been left alone for centuries. Many of them built a new kind of shared farming village called kibbutz, where everyone owned everything together and ate in one big dining hall. A few of those farms still run the very same way today. Then, in 1909, 66 families did something bold. They stood on a stretch of empty sand dunes just north of the old port of Jaffa and decided to build a brand new city from nothing. To split up the land fairly, they did the simplest thing you can imagine. They collected seashells on the beach, numbered them, and drew them out like a prize draw. That was the entire city planning meeting. They named the new town Tel Aviv, borrowed from the title of one of Herzl's novels. Today, it's a glittering global city, packed with skyscrapers, beaches, and tech companies worth billions. A whole modern city that started as a lottery on an empty beach. The Jews were trickling back into the land. The Arabs who had lived there for centuries were watching it happen and getting more and more nervous. And then a giant world war broke out and dropped this whole place into the hands of one single outside power. A power that was about to turn everything upside down. That power was Britain. In World War I, Britain fought the Ottoman Empire, the Turks who had ruled the place for 400 years, and beat them. In 1917, a British general marched into Jerusalem and took control of the city. The story goes that he climbed down off his horse and entered through the gate on foot, out of respect for a place this holy. And just like that, the Holy Land had a new boss. And almost immediately, Britain got itself into a huge mess. One it had created all by itself, because to win the war, Britain had made big promises to just about everybody. It told the Arabs that if they rose up against the Turks, they'd get their own free countries afterward. And the Arabs took the deal. Leading the charge alongside them was one of the strangest heroes in modern history, a short, bookish British archaeologist named T.E. Lawrence. You might know him as his other name, Lawrence of Arabia. Before the war, his job was digging up ancient ruins. During the war, he traded his uniform for flowing Arab robes, rode camels across deserts everyone said couldn't be crossed, and blew up Turkish trains for fun. The Arab fighters loved him. The Turks put a bounty on his head, and newspapers back home turned him into a living legend. But while Lawrence was out there risking his life and promising the Arabs their freedom, his own government was quietly making sure that that promise would never be kept. In a secret deal, it sat down with France and quietly carved up the entire Middle East between the two of them. And then, in a famous letter of just 67 words, known as the Balfour Declaration, Britain promised to support a home country for the Jewish people right here in Palestine. 3 different promises, 1 piece of land. Britain was completely triple booked. Who knows what they were thinking? So the Jews kept arriving, and the numbers shot up after 1933 when the Nazis took power in Germany and Jews started running for their lives. The Arabs who had farmed and lived on this land for generations watched it filling up with newcomers and grew terrified of being pushed out of their own home. In the late 1930s, they rose up in a big rebellion against British rule and all the newcomers. The British shut it down hard, but the violence between the two sides never really stopped, and Britain, stuck in the middle and sick of the whole thing, just wanted out. Then came the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered across Europe in just a few years, and after the world saw the full horror of it, the argument was basically settled. The Jewish people clearly needed a safe homeland of their own, and they needed it fast. So, in 1947, a brand new group of countries called the United Nations stepped in with a plan. They would split the land into 2 separate countries, side by side, one for the Jews, one for the Arabs. The reaction was instant, and it was completely opposite.
Gentlemen, here is a plan. 2 states side by side. It's much smaller than we hoped for, but it's a state of our own. We'll take it.
You're handing out land that is already ours to people who just arrived? We reject every inch of it.
Perhaps we could discuss the borders.
There is nothing to discuss. The whole map is the problem.
We've waited too long to wait for a better map. Well, this seems like a good moment to mention we're leaving. Leaving? You can't leave now. Our boat is already packed. Best of luck, everyone.
The British couldn't be bothered with all this, so they finally packed their bags and left. The UN had drawn its neat little lines on the map, but the moment the Jewish state was actually born, every army around it got ready to strangle it in the cradle. On the 14th of May, 1948, a man named David Ben-Gurion stood up in a small art museum in Tel Aviv and made a huge announcement. After nearly 1,900 years, there was once again a Jewish state. He called it Israel. He didn't even say exactly where the new country's borders were, he just said it was real and hoped for the best. And then, he basically had to pray it would survive the night. The first country to say, yes, you're a real country, was the United States. And it said yes just 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion finished speaking. That was so fast that America's own officials were caught completely off guard, rushing to figure out what their president had just agreed to. But recognition wasn't gonna save anyone, because the very next morning, the armies of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and more all invaded at once, determined to crush the new country before it could take its first proper breath. Israel was tiny. It was outnumbered, and it was barely a day old. Almost everyone watching expected it to lose within a week or two. It didn't lose. Against all odds, Israel not only survived the invasion, it pushed the Arab armies back, and by the end of the fighting, it controlled even more land than the UN plan had handed it. The new country had passed its first brutal test. It was here to stay. But that very same war had a second side to it, a much darker one. While the fighting raged, around 700,000 Palestinian Arabs lost their homes and had to flee as refugees. Some ran from the war out of fear, others were forced out by Israeli forces. Many ended up in crowded camps in the surrounding lands, never able to return. The Palestinians call this the Nakba, an Arabic word meaning the catastrophe. Many of those families did something heartbreaking on their way out. They locked their front doors and put the key in their pocket, fully expecting to be back home in a few weeks once things calmed down. They never were. Today, more than 75 years later, many Palestinian families still have those old keys passed down from grandparents hanging on the walls of homes in refugee camps. A key to a door that, for most, no longer exists. And at the very same time, something similar was happening in the other direction. Over the next few years, around 700,000 Jews were thrown out of or fled Arab countries all across the Middle East, leaving behind homes their families had lived in for generations. Most of them poured straight into Israel. So the exact same event was two completely different stories, depending on who you were. To the Jews, 1948 was a miracle, the return of a homeland they had lost all the way back in the days of the Romans. To the Palestinians, it was the year they lost almost everything. Both of those things were true at the very same time, and that deep wound, torn open in 1948, has never really healed. Israel has won its war for independence. It finally had a country. But in winning, it had turned every single neighbor around it into a bitter enemy. And the most shocking war of the whole story, the one that would change the map yet again, was still on its way. After 1948, Israel and its neighbors spent nearly 20 years just glaring at each other across nervous borders. Then, in 1967, the Arab states began gathering their armies and moving them toward Israel, openly talking about finishing the job they'd started back in the first war. Israel, small and surrounded all over again, made a big decision. It would not sit there and wait to be hit. It would strike first. And strike it. Everywhere, all at once. In just 6 days, Israel shattered the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan and captured an enormous amount of new land. The Sinai Desert, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank. But the prize that stunned the Jewish world the most was the old city of Jerusalem. For the first time in nearly 1,900 years since the Romans had thrown them out and renamed the whole land, the Jewish people held their holiest city again. All those years locked out of their own city had finally come full circle. And yet, holding all that new land created the exact problem the world is still tangled up in today. Because Israel was now in charge of a huge number of Palestinians who badly did not want to be ruled by Israel. Overnight, the winner of the war had millions of people living under its control who saw it as a ruler they never wanted. 6 years later, in 1973, Egypt and Syria struck back with a surprise attack on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish year, and very nearly broke through. That terrifying close call pushed Egypt and Israel to try something nobody saw coming: actual peace. And in 1979, to get it, Israel agreed to hand back the entire Sinai Desert, a chunk of land about 3 times the size of Israel itself. Alright, everyone's here. Let's talk peace. We want it all back. Every last inch of the Sinai.
All of it? That desert is bigger than our whole country.
All of it. Or there's no beach.
Can we keep a beach? One beach?
No beach.
Maybe we should take a short break.
No break. All of it.
Does he ever say anything else?
All of it.
Israel handed it over, and it worked. The two countries have stayed at peace ever since. But the Egyptian president who signed that deal was later shot dead by his own people, who were furious that he had made peace with Israel. Peace with Egypt held, but peace with Palestinians never came. Deal after deal was tried, and every single one fell apart. The fighting kept returning, right up to the brutal Gaza war that broke out in October 2023, and the shaky ceasefire, a deal to stop the fighting that even now barely holds together. The land a Roman emperor once tried to erase is now one of the most powerful, high-tech countries on Earth, a place that turned empty sand dunes into towers of glass. And it's still fighting over the exact same city, the exact same holy rock that Jews, Christians, and Muslims have fought for since forever. Every peace deal so far has cracked in the end. Right now, today, the people living there are still waiting to find out how it ends. Nobody has managed to write that final chapter yet. If you thought Israel has a crazy history, just wait until you hear about those crazy kooks in Japan. The story of how they survived 2,000 years of total chaos is absolutely insane. Thanks for watching.